Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now, Carl.
She just introduced me.
I think I'm the first one that did that.
Well, we're back, and if you're still chewing, please continue. But glad all of you could make it tonight. Last time we were here together, I told a little story about two ladies fighting over a pew. And this voice from the back deciding the thing by saying, "Let the ugly one have it." Well, that story reminded me of Michael. And I guess that voice from the congregation didn't stop, because I was sitting there watching that finance report last night.
Yeah.
And some voice from the back there yelled my name and reminded everybody how old I was or something. And I was minding my own business, you know, half asleep.
Hell, I'm just surprised you remembered it. I mean, it's been 24 hours.
Anyway, I matched the story with Mike pretty good, so I thought I would try again with Connie. When I was in the activity building one evening, there was a group of ladies came in from our church to do some work, but they were mulling around and not getting anything done. And somebody said, "Well, is an elder here? An investor member?" And they said, "No." "Anybody designated leader?" "No." So they're just mulling around, and finally Connie says, "Time out. Let's get quiet. Sit over here. Let's talk. We got to get organized." Well, getting organized reminded me of a little church story. A tourist bus went over the hill, lost them all, 55 people. And they showed up all at once at the pearly gates, and it was a hassle trying to get them through. And so Peter was just befuddled, so he called upon someone who was a good organizer. He said, "Well, Mother Mary can handle this." And so he called upon her, and she said, "Well, we got to get them in smaller groups." And she says, "Okay, all of you men particularly who are Yankee fans are over here, and Boston Red Sox are over here, and who likes strawberry pie, and who likes it." And she was getting them in smaller groups. And finally she says, "Okay, you men who are left now, if you feel like you were not henpecked all your life by your wife, and you weren't dominated and controlled, you can go over here, and the guys that were, they can go over here." Well, at first nobody moved. And then one guy broke and moved, and he said, "I'll admit it, I was controlled by my wife." And so after about that time, 2 or 3 more joined, until there, at one point everybody was in that group except one guy. And so St. Peter goes over, he says, "You're remarkable." He says, "You know, they're all over there. They're all admitted, you know, being controlled by their wives." And he says, "But you stay right in this spot right here." He says, "Well, my wife told me to stand right here and don't move." So you have to get organized. Okay. Let me just give you what little I know about Connie. She can fill in the rest. But Connie's responsible for all those nice bouquets we see at our tables. She, with her husband, made a great Christmas album last week and provided it. I put it in my car and I played it all the time. And what else was I going to say about you, partner? It skipped my mind, but it come back
I knew
to
it.
heart.
It's okay. I'm gonna fill it in.
Oh, I was going to say that we are joined at the hip, figuratively speaking, because we both had hip replacements last year.
Same guy. Yeah.
Same position.
The same guy.
Yeah.
All right. Can you tell the rest of the story?
I
Okay?
will, thank you.
All right.
Okay, it's gonna help you on a little bit. It's a little bit too.
Step up. There we
Hello, hello, hello. That's, okay. All right, is that better? Okay. Let's see. Okay, now, this may be a little lengthy, but I think you'll laugh a lot, so it's okay. You will too. You know most of the stories, though, sorry. He knows most of the stories, sorry. But anyway, Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, especially with a big dinner that happened the night before. I know 2 nights in a row out can be a little much. I would like to introduce a friend of ours. She's actually a classmate of Don's, and she came to visit us, and her name is Cheryl Garner, and she has an identical twin, and she came to stay with us today, and she got she had to put up with me getting ready for this. So anyway, but we're so glad to have you. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. All right, here we go. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1951 by Raymond Joseph Ball from Syracuse, New York, and Leona Marie Schler from Altoona, Pennsylvania. It was my father's first year in seminary school, and we shortly, no, it was his last year, pardon me, and we shortly moved to Crawfordville/Sparta, Georgia, the middle of Georgia, to begin his first pastorate. When I was 2 years old, I crossed Highway 78, holding my puppy under my arm. My puppy's name was Rusty. 78 at that time was a major highway to Atlanta, Georgia, and the best road to get through middle Georgia. So my mother got a call, do you know where Connie is? No? Well, she's up downtown with her puppy. Oh, I'll come get her. So our next move was to Atlanta, where my father was pastor of Weekirk Presbyterian Church, and I was 3 when we moved. And my sisters Kathy and Beverly were born. I have a picture, you'll be seeing, of me talking to Santa Claus in 1957. This began my fascination for Christmas, decorating, and Christmas in general. It is my favorite time of the year. In 1959, we moved to Rome, Georgia, where my father was pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church. And the church was beginning to build a new sanctuary building, and my father found an abandoned flying squirrel and brought her home to me, and I raised Squeaky, the flying squirrel. She was allowed to come to school with me a few weeks so I could take care of her. I fed her with an eyedropper. She escaped the back porch while I was cleaning her cage, and she was around 5 years old when we lost her. And it was so much fun to feed her Cheerios because it looked like she had a donut in her hand. And she got her name Squeaky from getting her teeth caught in a pecan nut, and she would squeak till we could get it out of her mouth safely. She couldn't crack, you know, they had these long teeth, and she couldn't crack that pecan nut just like she wanted to. Later on, I learned to play piano and the flute, and I played in the band at high school. And one Thanksgiving parade, I met Don Cornell. He went to another high school in the Floyd County area, and we had first met at a garage where friends were developing a band called Jaywalker and the Pedestrians. And Don was interviewing with them to play saxophone. So he got the job, and my girlfriends were dating several of the guys in the band, and I thought I wanted to date Glenn, the drummer, but he was already dating one of my best friends, Vivian. But they decided we could double date. So we went out, and I soon discovered it wasn't Glenn, the drummer, I was interested in anymore. This began the romance. I don't know if you noticed that I said I met Don Cornell. Well, a very southern friend had introduced me to him, and I thought he said Cornell. So one day, I was looking at our Christmas cards at home, and I asked my mother, who is Frank Mary and Don Cornell? And she says, well, by this time he's my boyfriend. And she said, well, the card's from your boyfriend's family, and his last name's Cornell. I said, not Cornell? And she says, no, Cornell. And I went, oh, okay. So I never got over that one. So I graduated. I was smart enough to graduate from West Rome High School. And Jimmy Carter, then governor of Georgia, spoke at my commencement. The next day, my family moved to Florence, South Carolina for my father to begin Florence's 5th Presbyterian Church called Parkwood. During my last year of high school, Donna graduated from high school earlier, and he was enrolled in Georgia Tech. Well, he couldn't stand it. And so after 9 months of the place, he called Berry College in Rome and said, could he transfer there if they still had his full scholarship? notice full scholarship. They did, and he was able to come. So he was around for my graduation. And then when my family moved, thus began the long distance romance. And we saw each other about every 6 weeks during that year. I went to the University of South Carolina at Florence, South Carolina, University of South Carolina at Florence, for 1 year and transferred to Berry College to be with Don. I mean, I'm totally blind at Don. That's it. So we got engaged 3 weeks later. Oh boy, for the parents. We had to graduate first. So during my second Christmas home from college, tragedy struck when my father died of a heart attack at 46. Thankfully, he had been able to build a house in Florence, and my mother lived there till she died. The day before he died, he had blessed our wedding, and we were married in his church in Florence on March 18th, 1972. It was a happy wedding, and we spent our honeymoon at Myrtle Beach. We stayed at a neighbor's beach house, just 3 blocks from the beach. And it was cold that night, and I had to make the bed. And Don went to turn the oil furnace on for heat. We went to bed, and Don had cracked the window for air flow. And we got up the next morning, and we looked at each other, and we both had soot in our noses. And there was a layer of soot all over the inside of that cabin. The glass door had cracked, and during, I told you it'd be funny, the door had a crack in it, and during the night it slid down and caused this problem. It was a wonder we weren't dead. So we spent the next 4 hours cleaning up the honeymoon beach house. So later we take a ride downtown to downtown Myrtle Beach and saw advertisements, you won't believe this, for honeymoon suites, $6 a night. We could have afforded that. So if we'd only known. We had to return to school, and Don graduated from Berry in the spring of 1972, and I graduated in the fall of 1972. And Jimmy Carter, now former governor of Georgia, was a speaker at my college graduation. He announced to us then that he was planning to run for president. We bought a 2-bedroom trailer without wheels under it after we got married, and that was cheaper, so we could afford this crazy thing. So, however, Don was accepted to University of Georgia to begin studies in chemistry. So we borrowed wheels, moved it to Athens trailer park. Then he had to take the wheels off and take the wheels back to Rome, Georgia, and put them back on the trailer that they came off of.
That's hunger and hardship.
So anyway, so we got settled in the new trailer park in Athens. I started my first job teaching in Siloam, Georgia, which is not far from Crawfordville. And I taught 10 3-year-olds. It was 10 3-year-olds, and it was part of a pilot program in Georgia to study the effects of early learning on underprivileged children. I drove 90 miles a day to work for 2 years, but I loved the job. It was the best teaching job I ever had.
90 miles one way or one?
Both round trip for 2 years.
But it's on country roads probably.
It was too
What
late.
was your pay?
It was worth it. It was pay, honey. By that time, that was all we just needed
Give you
pay.
enough gas to get back and
Yeah,
forth?
yeah. And there were other teachers with me, and we shared the cost. Don's chemistry professor his professors kept leaving the College of Chemistry at the university, and they kept going into private practice work, and so he decided to apply for medical school. Now, my mother had told me not to marry a doctor or a preacher because they spent too much time on the job. So he got accepted, of course, and I told him I'm sorry, but it wasn't the plan, but here we go. So, so we bought wheels for the trailer and moved to Augusta, Georgia. See that income help. Where he began his medical school. I got a job teaching first grade, and 2 years later, a kindergarten teaching job through a government program in the public school system. Georgia did not have a kindergarten program yet. I taught 25 kindergartners from 8 to 11 a.m., had an hour for lunch, and taught another 25 kindergartners from 12 to 3. I did have an A, thank goodness. And during my 3rd year, I started work on a Master of Early Childhood and graduated with my master's at the end of that year. But tragedy struck again, and Don's mother died at the age of 53 in Rome, Georgia. I taught one more year. The next year I taught, I was pregnant with our first child, Christopher Patrick, born May 20th, 1978. We had sold the trailer with the wheels and rented a house to bring Chris home to, and now it was time to move to Don's residency program at Memorial Hospital in Savannah to train in radiology. I retired from teaching. We lived in an apartment behind Memorial, belonged by Memorial. We moved into a 2-bedroom in July 1978, and Chris was 6 weeks old. Don had been making his bottles, and then he had to start his residency. So I took him to his first baby exam. You'll love this. And I couldn't answer the doctor's questions about his feeding habits because Don had been making all his bottles. So we figured out Chris was consuming too many bottles, and I had to start feeding him cereal and slow down on the bottles. And that was the first time he slept through the night. Amen.